And at the end of the day, I do believe that you have to appeal to long-term national self-interest. At the end, I may sound very cynical, but geopolitics is a very cold, cruel game. It's not about being nice. It's about appealing to hard-core, long-term interests. And at the end of the day, the United States has got to assess whether its presence in East Asia is a major asset for America's long-term interests. And remember that what's unique about Southeast Asia, and seriously, there are not many other parts of the world can replicate this. There are huge reservoirs of goodwill towards the United States in Southeast Asia. It's partly the Cold War history. ASEAN is a pro-American creation, denounced by Russia and China, Soviet Union and China when it was created. And there's a long history of happy engagement between the United States and Southeast Asia. But the sad part is this. Most Americans are not even aware that Southeast Asia exists. And most Americans are certainly not aware that there are huge pools of reservoir goodwill towards the United States in this region. So you have a precious asset here that can go to waste. And similarly, even within East Asia, and certainly in Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, there's a lot of goodwill towards the United States. But at the end of the day, if you want to preserve that, it requires long-term commitment. It cannot go up and down on the basis of election cycles. And so I hope that you can create a constituency within the United States, a bipartisan constituency that says, hey, American presence in this region is important and we must be part of it. And of course, at the end of the day, frankly also, I'm sure we're going to discuss it at some point in time, how you manage China is equally important, right? As you can see from these countries in this region, they want to be friends with the United States and they want to be friends with China. Okay, and they have to be. Because if the United States is going to be around for 100 years, China will be around 1,000 years. So Southeast Asians dealt with China 1,000 years ago. They have to deal with China 1,000 years from now. So they have to preserve those links also. So managing that very delicate change requires a certain degree of political sophistication within Washington, D.C., which frankly, as of now, doesn't exist yet. So that's what we need to build in Washington, D.C.
On the China one, I'm going to quote a little bit of your book, because I did make a bunch of highlights. But one which I thought was super interesting was when you said, for great powers, such as the United States, their influence doesn't depend on the quality and ability of their ambassadors. Power speaks more eloquently than personality in generating influence. And I actually thought, given that you mentioned China, when I read that, I thought, okay, great powers such as the United States. And I thought, well, same for China, right? Can you talk a little bit more about the fact that power speaks more and has more influence than individuals or individual personalities? Because it doesn't really feel like that right now when you have leaders of these huge countries who are such strong personalities that it almost rides out any kind of policy conversation.
Well, I can tell you that, I was an ambassador for many years. And although I was never actually what I call a bilateral ambassador, although I was head of mission in Cambodia in 73, 74, when the war was taking place. And that's when I learned a lot about geopolitics, because every day the city would be shelled. And then I realized, hey, war is a serious business. But I can tell you, once you become an ambassador and you arrive at a capital, one of the first questions you ask yourself is, who's the most important ambassador in this capital? Because there's a hierarchy among ambassadors, clearly. And quite often, the ambassador of a neighboring country would be very important, because they would have to understand their neighbor very well, clearly. But also, you also realize that whoever the great power of the day also that ambassador will be very, very important. And you give a concrete example. Throughout the Cold War, if you went to Bangkok, right, very clearly the most powerful ambassador in Bangkok by far was the American ambassador, right? Because, Thailand was a treaty ally, Thailand was a very important staging post for operations in Indochina, and there had always been a certain degree of closeness between the Thai establishment and the American establishment. So the American ambassador is number one, and frankly in those days the Chinese ambassador was not very consequential. I mean, important, but not that consequential. But today, I think if you go to Thailand and you ask yourself which ambassador is more important, it would depend also on which country does, for example, does Thailand do more trade with, United States or China? And the answer is China. And which country is engaged in new projects in China, right? Again, in Thailand. And I suspect the answer again is China. So progressively you find that the standing of the Chinese ambassador is slowly going up, and the relative standing of the US ambassador is going down. And also in terms of visits, for example, Chinese leaders have more visits in Thailand than American leaders do. In fact, I can tell you this, one American diplomat based in Southeast Asia one day called me up and said, "Kishore, help me." This was in a year when there was another crisis in the Middle East, and the Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, was debating whether or not to come for an ASEAN meeting. And this American diplomat said, "Kishore, help me persuade Condi, she must come for the ASEAN meeting, So that's the kind of consistency of attention that China gives to Southeast Asia then becomes a plus, whereas the inconsistency of the United States becomes a minus, and then that affects the ranking of ambassadors too. So it is a reality, but it keeps changing all the time. It's dynamic. So for example, let's say if the United States decides to mount a major ASEAN initiative, which to some extent Joe Biden tried to do by inviting the ASEAN ambassadors to the US and so on and so forth. Let's say if the United States proposes a new working arrangement with ASEAN, then things can change. But at the end of the day, it's partly a reflection of your power and your commitment to the region, and not personality. And that's a reality of international relations.